In the vast darkness between stars, where empires rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that few species have learned. Compassion is not weakness. It is the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The Galactic Council had rules, strict protocols, non-interference policies that had kept peace for 10,000 years. But they never accounted for humans, a species so young they barely understood their own solar system, yet so fundamentally different that their very existence would challenge everything the research vessel Prometheus Dawn drifted silently through the 442 system, its sensors sweeping across the fourth planet like gentle fingers probing an ancient wound. Dr. Sarah pressed her palm against the observation deck's reinforced viewing port, watching the world rotate slowly below. Once, this planet had been home to a civilization of crystalline beings who had mastered biotechnology in ways that made human genetic engineering look like finger painting. Now it was a graveyard. Radiation levels are still too high for extended surface operations, reported Lieutenant from his position at the sensor array. The young officer's voice carried the careful neutrality that all Terran Space Force personnel learned when discussing dead worlds. There had been too many of them discovered in recent years. Sarah nodded without turning from the viewport. At 38, she had seen more extinct civilizations than most saw in entire careers. There were the 17th species humanity had discovered that had destroyed themselves in what the textbooks clinically termed collapse events. The pattern was always the same: a period of rapid technological advancement, followed by resource depletion, social fragmentation, and finally catastrophic warfare that left nothing but ruins and radiation. Any signs of survivors in the outer settlements? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The preliminary scans had been thorough, and the Galactic Council's reports on the extinction were considered definitive. Still, hope died hard in the human heart. "Negative, Doc," replied. "The automated probes confirm what the survey team found 6 months ago. Complete biosphere collapse. No life signs above the bacterial level." Sarah finally turned away from the viewport, her reflection ghosting across the reinforced glass. A slight woman with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard issue blue jumpsuit of the Terran Archaeological Corps. Her dark eyes held the particular weariness of someone who had spent too long cataloging the failures of intelligence to overcome its own destructive impulses. The Prometheus Dawn was a joint venture between the Terran Federation and the Galactic Council, part of an ongoing effort to understand why so many species destroyed themselves at roughly the same technological plateau. Humans, as the members of the galactic community, were considered ideal for this research precisely because of their youth and objectivity. They had no ancient prejudices, no old grudges, no cultural blind spots that might interfere with scientific observation. What the other species didn't understand was that humans carried a different kind of blind spot, one that made them incapable of simply observing suffering without acting. Captain Martinez wants to see you on the bridge, Doctor, announced Ensign Park over the ship's communication system. Priority message from Earth. Sarah made her way through the ship's corridors, nodding to the various crew members she passed. The Prometheus Dawn carried a complement of 47 beings from 7 different species, though humans made up the majority. It was still strange, even after 3 years of cooperation, to pass by the environmental pods where the methane breathing worked, or to see the towering engineer checking power conduits with his 4 arms. The bridge was a study in functional efficiency, designed to accommodate the varying physiological needs of its mixed crew. Captain Martinez stood at the central command station, her weathered face illuminated by the soft blue glow of tactical displays. At 55, she was a veteran of the Rigel border conflicts and one of the few human officers trusted by the Galactic Council to command a joint species vessel. Sarah, Martinez said without preamble, "We've got a problem." What kind of problem?" Martinez gestured to the communications officer, a lean whose feathered crest was currently displaying muted tones of concern. "Ka picked up a distress beacon about an hour ago. Low-power emergency transmission from the planet's surface." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "That's impossible. The surveys were thorough. There's nothing alive down there except someone who's dying," Martinez interrupted. "The transmission is automated, but it's coming from one of the outer research stations in the northern hemisphere. Location shows minimal radiation exposure, probably protected by some kind of natural barrier." What does the Galactic Council want us to do? Martinez's expression hardened. Standard protocol. Document the transmission but maintain quarantine. No surface contact. The planet is classified as a dead zone, and that classification stands regardless of isolated survival pockets. Sarah stared at the tactical display, watching the blinking dot that represented the distress beacon. Somewhere down there on that poisoned world, someone was calling for help. Someone who had survived the destruction of their entire civilization, clinging to life in whatever shelter they had found, hoping that someday someone would hear their cry and answer it. How long has the beacon been active? She asked. Unknown, replied Ka, his harmonious voice carrying undertones of distress. The signal is weak and intermittent. It could have been transmitting for days, weeks, or even months. And what about the radiation levels at the source? The lieutenant pulled up the relevant data. Elevated but not immediately lethal. Standard environmental suits would provide adequate protection for short-term exposure. The real danger would be staying too long. Martinez studied the readings with the calculating eye of an experienced commander. Even if we could mount a rescue operation, we're talking about a violation of council protocols. The quarantine exists for good reasons. We don't know what caused the collapse. It could be a pathogen, a nanotech plague, or something else entirely. But if there are survivors, Sarah began, then they've already been exposed to whatever killed their species, Martinez finished. Our intervention could spread the contamination beyond this system. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional chirp of monitoring equipment. Sarah found herself thinking about the archaeological sites she had excavated on dozen worlds, the homes where families had once lived, the schools where children had learned, the hospitals where the sick had hoped to heal. All of them were empty now, their inhabitants reduced to whatever organic traces had survived the passage of time. But this was different. This time someone was still alive. Captain, she said carefully, what if the survivor has information about what happened to the... From a scientific perspective, a first-hand account could be invaluable for our research. Martinez raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty thin justification for violating quarantine protocols, Doctor. Is it? The Council wants to understand why civilizations self-destruct. We've been studying ruins and radiation patterns for 3 years without getting any closer to an answer. This could be our only chance to hear from someone who actually witnessed a collapse event. And if we bring back some kind of plague that wipes out human space. Sarah met her captain's gaze steadily. Then we'll have learned something very important about why the died. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays. Finally, she turned to the communications officer. What's your analysis of the transmission pattern? The feathered alien consulted his instruments, his crest shifting to deeper blue tones that indicated intense concentration. The signal appears to be coming from a standard emergency beacon, the kind used by research teams working in hazardous environments. However, there are irregular modulations that suggest manual override. Someone is actively controlling the transmission. So we're not just talking about an automated distress call. Correct, Captain. Someone down there is deliberately trying to contact us. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Somewhere on that poisoned world, a survivor was manually operating an emergency beacon, probably watching the skis and hopping for rescue that might never come. The image of that lone figure, perhaps the last of their entire species, was almost unbearable. Captain, she said quietly, we can't just leave them. I know what you're thinking, Sarah, and I understand it. But we have our orders. Our orders are to research dead civilizations. Well, this one might not be completely dead yet. Martinez turned to face her fully, and Sarah could see the conflict in the older woman's eyes. Martinez had not earned her command by being reckless, but she had also not earned it by being heartless. Even if I were willing to consider a rescue mission, Martinez said slowly, we'd need approval from the Council. That could take weeks. How long do you think someone can survive on a dying world with limited resources? That's not the point. It's exactly the point, Sarah interrupted, her voice rising slightly. Every hour we spend debating protocols is an hour that survivor might not have. The lieutenant cleared his throat nervously. Captain, I'm picking up additional activity from the beacon. It's changing frequency in a regular pattern. What kind of pattern? The mathematical progression. Prime numbers, then sequence, then... Wait. His face went pale as he studied his instruments. Captain, this isn't just a distress call. Someone down there is trying to communicate. They're demonstrating intelligence, showing they understand mathematics and can manipulate their equipment with precision. The bridge fell silent again. Sarah felt her heart pounding as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about rescuing a random survivor. This was about making contact with a being who was actively trying to reach out to them. Someone who understood they were being observed and was desperately trying to prove their worth of rescue. There's something else, continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The signal strength is weakening. Whatever power source they're using, it's dying. Sarah looked around the bridge at the faces of her colleagues, human and alike. She could see her own thoughts reflected in their expressions. The recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented and tragic. The knowledge that they might be the only thing standing between a thinking being and oblivion. Captain, she said finally, the Galactic Council sent us here to study dead civilizations. But maybe this time we can study how one refuses to die. Martinez stared at the tactical display for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Get me a detailed surface scan of the beacon's location. I want to know exactly what we'd be walking into. Does that mean? It means I'm considering our options, Doctor. Nothing more. But as Sarah watched the captain's face, she could see something that gave her hope. Martinez was a good officer, but more than that, she was a good human being. And sometimes being human meant doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity as the ship's sensors focused on the distress beacon's location. What they found was both encouraging and deeply troubling. The signal was coming from a research outpost built into a natural cave system in the planet's northern mountains. The caves appeared to provide significant protection from surface radiation, and the facility showed signs of jury-rigged life support systems still functioning on minimal power. But the scans also revealed why the facility's occupant was running out of time. The makeshift life support was failing, and the artificial atmosphere within the caves was slowly being contaminated by radioactive particles seeping through damaged seals. According to Lieutenant's calculations, whoever was down there had perhaps 48 hours before the air became unbreathable. There's something else, reported as he studied the latest sensor data. I'm detecting biosigns, but they're unusual. Unusual how? Martinez asked. Well, are silicon-based, crystalline in structure. But these readings suggest both silicon and carbon-based life signs in the same location. Sarah frowned. That doesn't make sense. Physiology can't support carbon-based biological processes. Unless, said slowly, we're not just dealing with a survivor. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If there were multiple survivors, possibly from different species, the rescue mission would become exponentially more complicated. But it would also become exponentially more important. Captain, Carr reported from his communications station, the beacon has just transmitted a new sequence. It appears to be. Yes, it's a mathematical representation of atomic structures. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium. They're sending us the periodic table. They're trying to establish a communication protocol, Sarah breathed. They know we're here and they're trying to talk to us. Martinez stood in the center of the bridge, surrounded by data streams and sensor displays, weighing a decision that could determine not only the fate of the survivors below, but potentially the future of human participation in the Galactic Council. The regulations were clear. No contact with quarantined worlds. But the situation was unprecedented, and regulations had a way of becoming inadequate when confronted with the full complexity of real life. Doctor, Martinez said finally, I want you to prepare a detailed proposal for a limited rescue operation. Full environmental protection, minimal surface time, complete decontamination protocols. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Sarah felt a surge of hope and terror in equal measure. You're authorizing the mission. I'm authorizing the planning phase, Martinez corrected. But I want options, Doctor, because someone down there is trying very hard to stay alive, and I'll be damned if we're going to watch them die because of bureaucratic red tape. As the Prometheus Dawn continued its orbit around the dying world, its crew worked with desperate efficiency to devise a plan that might save the lives below. But none of them yet understood that their decision would set in motion events that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about the descent through the planet's toxic atmosphere. Felt like diving into hell itself. Dr. Sarah watched through the shuttle's reinforced viewports as orange and yellow clouds of radioactive debris swirled past. Remnants of the industrial complexes that had once made the one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The shuttle Hermes shuddered and bucked as it navigated through the worst of the contaminated air masses, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Radiation levels are spiking, reported Dr. James from the pilot's seat. The missions was also their best shuttle pilot, a combination of skills that made him invaluable for exactly this kind of operation. Environmental suits are holding steady, but I don't want to stay down there any longer than absolutely necessary. Sarah checked her own suit's readings for the third time in as many minutes. The bulky environmental gear made movement awkward, but it was their only protection against the radioactive hellscape below. Behind her, Doctor finished checking the emergency medical equipment they had brought for whatever survivors they might find. "A contact established," came Captain Martinez's voice through the communication system. "The beacon is responding to our approach signal. Someone down there definitely knows we're coming." Through the toxic haze, the landing site gradually became visible. A relatively clear area near the base of a mountain range, where natural rock formations provided some protection from the worst radiation sources. The research facility was built into a cliff face, its crystalline architecture now dulled and cracked by years of exposure to the poisoned atmosphere. As the shuttle touched down with a gentle thud, Sarah felt her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was what she had trained for: first contact with unknown survivors, the chance to preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost forever. But she was also acutely aware that they might be walking into a trap, or worse, that they might accidentally contaminate themselves with whatever had destroyed the civilization. "Remember, people," she said into her suit's microphone, "we're not just here to rescue survivors. We're here to learn, document everything. Take samples of anything that seems relevant, and for God's sake, don't take any unnecessary risks." The three scientists stepped out of the shuttle into the alien landscape. their boots crunching on crystallized soil that had once been fertile farmland. The radiation detector on Sarah's belt clicked steadily, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the time they could safely remain on the surface. The entrance to the research facility yawned before them like a mouth, its bioluminescent markers still functioning after all these years. Architecture was unlike anything humanity had encountered. Flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to grow from the rock itself rather than being built upon it. Even in its damaged state, the facility possessed an alien beauty that took Sarah's breath away. Emotion sensors are picking up activity deeper in the complex, reported, studying her portable scanner. Biosigns are definitely present, though I'm still getting those mixed readings mentioned. They moved through the outer chambers of the facility, their suit lights illuminating walls covered in script and technical diagrams. Many of the surfaces showed obvious damage, scorch marks, blast patterns, and areas where the crystalline structure had been deliberately shattered. This hadn't been accidental destruction. Someone had fought here. These look like defensive positions, observed, examining a series of barricades that had been erected across one of the corridors. Someone turned this research station into a fortress. But fighting whom? Sarah wondered aloud. If the destroyed themselves in some kind of civil war, why would researchers in an isolated facility need to defend themselves? They continued deeper into the complex, following the signal from the emergency beacon. The facility's internal lighting was mostly dead, but here and there they encountered chambers where auxiliary power still functioned, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In one room, they found evidence of hasty evacuation, research materials scattered on the floor, personal belongings abandoned mid-task. But it was in the next chamber that they found their first real surprise. And Jesus Christ, breathed, his voice tight with shock. The room had clearly been converted into some kind of medical facility. Makeshift surgical equipment shared space with jury-rigged life support systems, and along one wall stood a series of what could only be described as incubators. But these weren't designed for physiology. They were too small, too warm, and configured for beings that breathed oxygen rather than the methane-argon mixture that required. Someone's been treating carbon-based, said, her voice filled with amazement. Look at these readouts: blood pressure, heart rate, brain activity patterns. These are mammalian life signs. Sarah approached one of the incubators, her breath catching in her throat as she saw movement within. Something small and fragile stirred in the artificial womb, its tiny form barely visible through the transparent aluminum viewing port. "My God," she whispered, "there's something alive in there." The three scientists gathered around the incubator, staring in amazement at the tiny being within. It was clearly not. Its skin was soft and pinkish rather than crystalline, and its body structure suggested a vertebrate physiology. As they watched, the small creature opened what appeared to be eyes and made a weak, mewing sound that somehow bypassed all their translation protocols and went straight to the most primitive parts of their brains. It was the sound of a baby crying. "That's impossible," breathed. "There are no known carbon-based intelligent species in this sector. The Galactic Council would have records." She was interrupted by a new sound, footsteps approaching from deeper in the facility. The three humans turned toward the source of the noise, their hands instinctively moving to the emergency weapons they carried. But when the figure emerged from the shadows, their weapons remained untouched. The being that approached them was, but unlike any they had encountered in their studies. Where most members of the species stood nearly 3 meters tall and possessed crystalline skin that reflected light in brilliant patterns, this individual was smaller, their crystal structure dulled and fractured. More importantly, they moved with the careful, protective posture of someone carrying something precious. In their lower arms, they held what was unmistakably another infant, this one clearly of the same species as the one in the incubator. The tiny being was wrapped in what appeared to be emergency thermal blankets, and its soft cries harmonized with those of its companion in a heartbreaking duet of need and vulnerability. The adult stopped several meters away from the humans and began to speak in their own language, a complex series of harmonic tones that the universal translators struggled to interpret. But even without perfect translation, the meaning was clear. This being was asking for help. "Doctor," came Captain Martinez's voice through their communication system. "We're monitoring your biosigns. What's your status down there?" Sarah found herself unable to respond for a moment, overwhelmed by the implications of what they had discovered. Finally, she managed to activate her microphone. "Captain, we've found the survivors, 2 of them, and they're not what we expected." Explain." "Well, we have an adult caring for what appear to be 2 infants of an unknown carbon-based species. The adult seems to have converted the research facility into some kind of nursery." There was a long pause before Martinez responded. "Are you saying we have a caring for alien children?" That's exactly what I'm saying, Captain. And from the look of things, these infants are in critical condition. They need immediate medical attention." Sarah approached the slowly, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. As she drew closer, she could see that the crystalline being was in poor condition. Their natural luminescence was dim, and several sections of their body showed signs of radiation damage. But their grip on the infant they carried was strong and protective. "Can you understand us?" Sarah asked, hoping the universal translator would convey her meaning. This response came through the translation system with surprising clarity. "I have been waiting for you. The children grow weak, and I cannot provide what they need." Who are they?" Sarah gestured toward the infants. "What species?" "They are the last," they replied, their harmonic voice filled with exhaustion and grief. "The last of the I am Ka, researcher of biological systems. I made a promise to their parents before they died." The name meant nothing to any of the humans, but the implications were staggering. This was a species that the Galactic Council had no records of, beings who had apparently been present on this world when the civilization collapsed. And somehow, in the chaos of societal breakdown, a single scientist had taken responsibility for the survival of their children. The incubation systems are failing," Ka continued. "My knowledge of their physiology is limited, and my resources are nearly exhausted. I have been broadcasting distress signals for many solar cycles, hoping someone would come." Immediately began scanning the infants with her medical equipment. "Their vital signs are weak but stable," she reported. "Severe malnutrition, possible dehydration, and what looks like exposure to low-level radiation. But they're alive." "How long have you been caring for them?" Sarah asked Ka. 47 solar cycles," they replied. "Since the last of their people died in the southern settlements." I was working with a research team when the crisis began. When the settlements started to fail, their leader brought the children to me. She said I was the only one who might be able to keep them alive. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she began to understand the full scope of what had happened here. A researcher from one species had spent more than a year caring for the orphaned children of another, alone in a dying world, desperately trying to keep them alive with limited resources and incomplete knowledge of their biology. "Ka," she said gently, "we're going to help you, all of you. We have medical facilities on our ship that can care for the children. You will take them away from this place. Yes, we'll take all three of you to safety." The crystalline features shifted in what Sarah realized was an expression of profound relief. I had begun to fear that my signals would not be answered. The children require nutrients I cannot provide, and my power systems are failing. I was already contacting the shuttle, arranging for emergency medical transport. But as the reality of their situation sank in, Sarah began to realize the magnitude of what they were attempting. They were not just rescuing three survivors. They were preserving the last remnants of an unknown species, beings who might hold crucial knowledge about what had happened to this world. "Inka," she said, "can you tell us what happened to your people? What caused the collapse?" There was quiet for a long moment, their dulled crystal structure pulsing with faint patterns of light. "It was not a single cause," they finally replied. "Resource depletion led to competition. Competition led to conflict. Conflict led to the development of weapons that should never have been created." What kind of weapons?" "Biological agents designed to target specific genetic markers. Each faction sought to eliminate their rivals while preserving themselves. But the agents mutated, spread beyond their intended targets. In the end, they consumed everything." Sarah felt a chill run through her as the implications became clear. They had destroyed themselves with biological warfare, weapons so sophisticated and virulent that they had rendered the entire planet uninhabitable. The fact that Ka and the infants had survived at all was nothing short of miraculous. "They were not part of our conflicts," Ka continued. "They were a peaceful species focused on art and philosophy rather than technology. They lived in small communities, causing no harm to anyone. But the biological agents did not discriminate. They died along with the rest. Except for these two. Except for these two. Their parents brought them to me because my research facility had the most advanced quarantine systems. They hoped I could find a way to protect them from the contamination. And you've been doing that for over a year. I have done my best, but my best is no longer sufficient. They need more than I can provide. As if summoned by their conversation, both infants began to cry simultaneously. Weak, plaintive sounds that seemed to pierce straight through the environmental suits to the hearts of the humans listening. Sarah watched as Ka immediately moved to comfort them, their crystalline fingers surprisingly gentle as they adjusted the bobbies' positions. They hunger, Ka explained. I have been able to synthesize some nutrients, but my equipment is failing. They grow weaker each day. Was already preparing emergency nutrition packets from their medical supplies. These should help temporarily, she said, but they need proper formula designed for their specific physiology. We'll have to analyze their biology more completely once we get them to the ship. The doctor, came Martinez's voice through the communication system. What's your status? We're tracking some concerning atmospheric changes in your area. Sarah looked at her radiation detector and felt her heart sink. The steady clicking had accelerated noticeably since they had entered the facility. Captain, we need immediate extraction. We have 3 survivors, 1 adult and 2 infants of an unknown species. But the radiation levels are climbing. Understood. Hermes is prepping for immediate departure. What's your estimated time to surface? Sarah looked around the makeshift nursery, realizing that they would need to carefully transport not just the survivors, but also whatever data and equipment might be salvageable. 15 minutes if we move fast. You have 10. Long-range sensors are detecting an incoming radiation storm. If you're not off the surface in 10 minutes, you'll be trapped until it passes. The next several minutes became a blur of frantic activity. Worked to disconnect the portable life support systems that were keeping the infants alive, while prepared emergency medical care for transport. Sarah helped Ka gather what research data they could carry, thus tired but determined efforts to save whatever knowledge remained of their civilization. But it was when they were preparing to leave that Sarah made a discovery that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In a small alcove near the main laboratory, she found what appeared to be a memorial wall. Hundreds of small crystal formations, each one inscribed with script. "What is this?" she asked Ka. The names of the dead," the replied quietly. "I have tried to remember them all. My people, the everyone who died because of our failure to find peace." Sarah stared at the wall, realizing that each crystal represented not just a name but an entire life, an entire set of dreams and hopes and relationships that had been extinguished by the biological weapons. The scope of the tragedy was overwhelming. Millions of beings reduced to inscriptions on crystal fragments. There are so many," she whispered. "Yes, and somewhere among them are the parents of the children we must save." As they finally made their way back to the surface, carrying the precious cargo of the last survivors of two civilizations, Sarah found herself thinking about the memorial wall and the terrible weight of responsibility that Ka had carried for over a year. This single being had made themselves responsible not just for the survival of two alien children, but for the preservation of the memory of an entire world. The shuttle ride back to the Prometheus dawn was tense and difficult. The infants were in critical condition, their small bodies barely clinging to life despite Ka's careful care. The adults themselves were showing signs of severe radiation poisoning, their crystalline structure continuing to deteriorate. But as they broke through the planet's atmosphere and headed toward the safety of the research vessel, Sarah realized that they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not just rescued survivors of a civilization's collapse. They had preserved the evidence of something that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence, cooperation, and the bonds that could exist between different species. The medical bay of the Prometheus dawn had been transformed into something resembling a cross between a nursery and an intensive care unit. Doctor moved between the specialized incubators with the focused intensity of someone fighting for 3 lives simultaneously. The two infants lay in carefully calibrated environments designed to mimic what little they knew of the species' natural requirements, while Ka rested in a nearby biobed, their crystalline form slowly responding to treatment for radiation poisoning. The good news is that all three of them are stable, reported to the assembled senior staff. The bad news is that stable doesn't mean safe. The infants are suffering from severe malnutrition, and we still don't fully understand their nutritional requirements. Ka has been incredibly resourceful, but they've been working with incomplete information for over a year. Captain Martinez leaned forward in her chair, studying the medical readouts displayed on the conference room's main screen. What do we know about this species? Anything in the galactic databases? Nothing, replied Doctor from her position across the table. I've run searches through every database we have access to. They don't appear in any Galactic Council records. As far as official documentation is concerned, they never existed. Lieutenant Commander Carr ruffled his feathered crest in the gesture of confusion. How is such a thing possible? The Council's survey protocols are thorough. Any intelligent species should have been during the initial system surveys. Unless they weren't considered intelligent, suggested Doctor, his voice carrying a troubling implication. Or unless someone made a decision not to record their existence. The conference room fell silent as the implications. The question now was whether the Galactic Council would see it the same way. Survival, and the true meaning of intelligence. Down on the planet's surface, in a cave system that had become a tomb for one civilization and a refuge for another, two very different kinds of beings continued their struggle against extinction. And the signal they sent to the stars carried more than just a plea for rescue. It carried the seeds of a revolution that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. The galaxy thought it knew about survival, evolution, and what it truly means to be civilized. This is the story of how one crying alien infant changed the course of galactic history. How a single human's refusal to follow protocol sparked a revolution that would echo across 1,000 worlds. How an act of simple kindness became the catalyst for the greatest transformation the galaxy had ever witnessed. Some called it madness, others called it hope. The universe would never be the same.